So it's my great pleasure today to welcome as our speaker in this Berggruen Institute speaker series, Amitav Acharya, who's the distinguished professor at the School of International Service at the American University in Washington, D.C. He was a fellow with us last academic year, as you know. He's a prolific and influential scholar of international relations, the author of 7 monographs and 4 edited volumes, including Constructing Global Order in 2018, The End of American World Order, also in 2018, Constructing a Security Community in Southeast Asia from 2014, The Making of Southeast Asia in 2013, Whose Ideas Matter in 2009. His ideas have appeared in leading international affairs journals such as International Organization, International Security, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, International Affairs, and World Politics. He's written op-eds for the Financial Times, for Washington Post, the Times of India, and many other newspapers around the world, and his commentary appears regularly on television programs from the BBC to CNN. Interestingly, he was the first non-Western scholar to be elected as president of the International Studies Association, the largest and most influential global network in international studies, American World Order, also in 2018, Constructing a Security Community in Southeast Asia from 2014, Making of Southeast Asia in 2013, Whose Ideas Matter in 2009. His ideas have appeared in leading international affairs journals such as International Organization, International Security, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, International Affairs, and World Politics. He's written op-eds for the Financial Times, for Washington Post, the Times of India, and many other newspapers around the world, and his commentary appears regularly on television programs from the BBC to CNN. Interestingly, he was the first non-Western scholar to be elected as president of the International Studies Association, the largest and most influential global network in international studies, and he's won several awards from them for meritorious service. He's previously been a professor at York University in Toronto, at the University of Bristol, at Rhodes University in South Africa, and at the Schwarzman School at Chiang Mai University. He's also been a fellow at both Harvard and Oxford. His project as a Berggruen Institute fellow last year was to examine the crisis in the liberal international order and the emergence of a more pluralistic and post-Western multiplex world. He'll be speaking to us today about how COVID-19 may reshape Asia. Amitav, it's with great pleasure we welcome you to this.
Thank you, Nils, and thank you, the Berggruen Institute, for giving me that fellowship, which really allowed me to do a lot of my work last year, and I'm very, very pleased with the experience. So thank you very much at the outset. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to focus on Asia, not the world order, but Asia in particular, and look at how COVID-19 might reshape Asian regional order. Now, even if it's a regional focus, but as most of us know, Asia is the world. I mean, Asia is a microcosm of what goes in the world. It moves and shakes the world because of its economic and its strategic place in the world. So I don't need to remind you that look at who are the great powers of today. I mean, United States, of course, is not an Asian country, but it's a resident Asian power. Then we have China, we have Japan, we have India. And in fact, if you look at the leading economies of the world, Japan, China, India are among the top 5. If you look at Asia's share in the world's GDP, everything is in a flux these days after COVID-19. But before the COVID-19 hit, Asia was well on its way to produce more than half of the world's GDP by 2040, probably even earlier. And in fact, I would have thought it would be even earlier, but the McKinsey consulting firm predicted that it would be 2040 when Asia would have overtaken the rest of the world, producing more than 50% of the world's GDP. And then you look at diplomacy, you look at military spending. I'll come to that. The leading military powers outside of the United States. Asia spends more money on military than Europe, has been the case for the past several years. So only the United States is ahead of Asia when it comes to military capacity. But China, India, Japan, South Korea, they are all significant military powers. So what happens to Asia is going to shape the world order as well. And this is why I decided today to speak about Asia and how COVID-19 is affecting Asia. I have written about how COVID-19 will affect world order earlier, but this is another part of that story. So how do you really make an assessment of Asia's role or Asia's the impact of COVID-19 on Asia? It's too early. We don't have all the data. Things are still happening as we speak about how COVID-19 is spreading in Asia and what impact it is having. But some trends are fairly clear. And one way to assess this overall impact of COVID-19 on Asian security is to look at what are the key drivers of Asian security. What really makes Asia stable and what makes it unstable. And drawing on some of my earlier work on these drivers, I identified 4 major drivers that are really key to understanding whether Asia will be peaceful and prosperous or divided and dangerous. And those 4 are economic growth and interdependence. I think that's the most critical. Second, the military balance. And that military balance is not just a US-China balance, but that's important, but also China and its neighbors. That regional balance, intra-regional balance. The third factor would be multilateral institutions or Asian regional institutions whose role is to provide confidence building, avenues for confidence building, trust, and possibly even mitigating, if not resolving, our rivalry among the big powers of the region. And last but not the least, ideology. Ideology is based on domestic politics, but also ideology is to what we call soft power. So those are the 4 drivers that can shape whether Asia becomes stable or unstable. And this is based on some of the work I did earlier on Asian security. But it is interesting and important to see how Asia is going to fare in the light of all these 4 areas that are going to be impacted by COVID-19. Let me start with economic growth and interdependence. There is no question in my mind, and in many scholars' mind, any expert mind, that economic growth and interdependence is the single most important factor in Asia's peace and stability. So it is not the military balance, it's not the institutions, or it's not democracy, authoritarianism. It's the economic growth, the rapid economic growth that kept the region together. And what it did was economic growth, which is Asia is a leader of global economic growth. It provided governments or allowed the governments of the region to reduce poverty, thereby promote domestic stability and also maintain regional peace. Because when you are growing fast and growing together, you have less need for a conflict. And that sort of a growth led to economic integration or interdependence. And this has been a very important factor. It cannot be overemphasized. But what is COVID-19 going to do? Again, it's preliminary, but the projections are not very good for Asia. So International Monetary Fund, IMF, predicts that Asia's economic growth will go down to 0 this year, 2020. And this will be the worst performance of the region in 60 years, since 1960s. And again, I cannot overemphasize how important this is going to be for the region. If it doesn't recover in 2021-22, this is going to be a big, big blow to Asian security and stability. And to make matters worse here, a lot of Asia's economic growth and interdependence comes from globalization. Asia is really the driver of globalization, particularly China, but also Southeast Asia, Japan, and lately also India. So much of Asia's GDP is actually driven by globalization, that a disruption of globalization is going to be a major catastrophe for the region. To give you an example, some data here. In 2015-17, Asia accounted for 1/3 of global trade, 1/4 of global capital flows, investment and capital flows. And this is very interesting in the light of COVID-19. 22% of global media and hospitality industry. Now, hospitality industry is one of the biggest sectors that is hit by the COVID-19, but so is global trade, and so is global financial flows. there are some estimates that global trade will decline by more than 12% this year, 2020. And COVID-19 is really disrupting global value chains. I mean, those of you who follow economics would know that almost 70% of world trade is generated by value chains, supply chains. And Asia, as the leader of globalization, depends on those value chains. And particularly China. China is the factory of the world, but China doesn't manufacture everything or most of the things on its soil. So whether it's an iPhone or it's a Dreamliner or and going back to Japanese period of Japanese economic primacy, microelectronics and automobiles, Asia is the hub of what we call transnational production and global value chain. And that's going to go down. That's so uncertain now that this is going to have a severe impact on Asian economic prospects and thereby Asian political stability. And to make matters worse, a lot of Western countries, led by the United States, President Trump, don't think supply chain, this is supply chain produces 70% of world trade, and Trump calls it a crazy idea. He actually used the term crazy idea. He wants the United States to get out of supply chain for essential commodities, and he wants to particularly get out of China. He wants American companies to get out of China. He wants to be self-reliant, more kind of a mercantilist approach to global growth that we had left behind since the 18th century or 19th century onwards. But America is not alone. European Union is also talking about self-reliance. India is talking about self-reliance. And so this is a conceptual shift from the way Asia has been doing its business and generating growth and prosperity and reducing poverty for the last 30, 40 years at least. Going to then the second driver, military balance. Here the situation is also complex, but I think probably a little more certain than economic development. Here the military balance, the major trend is China's relentless military buildup. China has been increasing defense spending for the last 30 to 40 years in a steady pace. Just to give you an example, between 2010 and 2019, the past 9 years, China increased its defense spending by 85% in those 9 years, 2010 to 2019. Whereas the United States during the same period cut it by 15%. And so this is just one indicator. But that doesn't tell you everything. If there is an actual conflict, we have to look at the military balance in relation to an actual conflict situation. And there are plenty in Asia. There could be conflicts in the East China Sea. There could be conflicts in South China Sea. We had military confrontation last month in India-China border. I'm talking about mainly the maritime conflicts, especially South China Sea and East China Sea, where the United States gets involved, and it's likely Taiwan Straits. United States will get involved directly. And there, the United States still has an advantage. United States leads in weapon systems, training, and doctrine. And this is not a point that is lost to Asian countries, although whether the United States will actually use them, under what conditions use them, is uncertain. But certainly, there's a feeling that the United States is still the military leader in Asia, and China has not overtaken. However, if you have a conflict in the region, the United States has 3 major disadvantages: distance, time, and stakes. So Asia is far from the American soil, or even Hawaii and Guam. Time, you need time to project forces, and stakes. For China, a conflict in Taiwan or in the region is more like life and death. And if you're like Trump, you might want to think, why do I want to sacrifice my troops, American troops, for defending Korea? And Trump has pretty much said that. So we are moving then into a situation that even the US has a very significant military lead over China, but that is kind of neutralized by the effect of distance, time, and the stakes. But having said that, we still do not I don't think the Chinese will challenge the United States militarily anytime soon. The Chinese are building up certain key capabilities to neutralize the American advantage in weapons platforms like the aircraft carriers or air power. So China is doing what is called anti-access area denial, A2AD. basically building a lot of missiles, ballistic missiles and cruise missiles to attack and destroy American ships, because the American Navy will be the major instrument of American power projection and intervention in a conflict in Taiwan Straits or in South China Sea or East China Sea. So China is targeting those capabilities and trying to deny the United States this access to this region and to deter an American intervention in favor of Taiwan or Japan or Southeast Asian countries. And this is not insignificant. This is not a point lost in the region. China's capability to deny American, or what is called anti-access, to build up its anti-access area denial capability is significant. But this is not enough. The United States also has its own anti-access area denial capability. If the Chinese deny the United States access to the Western Pacific, the United States can pretty much neutralize that with its own anti-access and area denial capability. So without going into too much detail on it, my overall sense is that a military balance favors the United States in a US-China conflict. But that's not the only conflict we can think of. What about a balance between the Chinese and Southeast Asians? And this is where COVID-19 is going to have an impact. Because Southeast Asia's military spends, China spends 5 times more money on its military than ASEAN countries, the 10 ASEAN countries combined. So where do you have a conflict, or you look at the deterrence effect of military balance? ASEAN countries are going to be affected by COVID-19. Historically, when economic growth slows down, ASEAN military spending goes down and military buildup goes down. It's a historical pattern. Some ASEAN countries are building up their navy and air force to deter China from intervening in their maritime zones or exclusive economic zones. That is going to be affected. They're going to cut back on their military quite significantly. China may not, but even if it does, it's still so far ahead anyway. So I have a feeling that if COVID-19 continues and the economic impact continues, the military balance in the region will tilt in China's favor even more. And that will give China a coercive capacity over Southeast Asia, unless, of course, the United States come to the aid of Southeast Asia, but nobody takes that for granted. When that happens, what happens to the political situation? Strategic balance is one thing. Well, the political situation will be that China will be seen more and more as a threat to the region. Now, in Southeast Asia, people don't want to talk about China threat. It's politically incorrect. But everybody knows China is a threat. And a very interesting survey done in Singapore by a think tank found that the vast majority of respondents found China as a threat. I can give you some examples. In Southeast Asia, this is a kind of an interesting paradox, by the way. China is actually seen in the region as the most significant economic power and the most significant political and strategic power over the United States. No other country is considered more significant economically and strategically. But that's not a good thing. Southeast Asians don't think this is good. They think it's a really bad thing. This threatens their security because 53.5% in this survey see China as a threat to their country's interests and sovereignty, compared to 21% for US, 5% for Japan, 3.5% for the EU, and 2.5% for India. So China poses, in the perception at least, a far more significant threat to Southeast Asia. And Southeast Asia is the big group of neighbors of China, 10 countries, more than 500 million, almost 600 million people now, $3.5 trillion GDP. Is not a small entity. And that sees China as a threat overwhelmingly. This is certainly going to even get more aggravated if this military balance moves even more in China's favor because of COVID-19. And also China has a trust deficit when it comes to Southeast Asia. So the same survey found that the question was asked that of the major powers in the world, China, US, Japan, European Union, combined together, and India, which country do you think can be expected to do the right thing? And the word is do the right thing when it comes to global peace, security, prosperity, and governance. Well, China scored 16.1%, just ahead of India, 16%. India was seen as not having the capacity. China was seen as not having the intention to provide that kind of do the right thing in contributing to global peace and security. Whereas Japan led with 61% saying that Japan will do the right thing. European Union actually scored at 38.7%, so fairly good score. And India was also seen as India was not as good as China, but it was mainly because of India's lack of capacity to contribute to global peace and security compared to China. But India actually did very well when it was asked whether which country is actually responsible stakeholder, which country respects and champions international law. Here, well, China came as only 10.5% of Southeast Asian respondents thought China is a responsible stakeholder that really respects and champions international law. Pretty much that China is seen as a lawbreaker, not a law respecter or a lawmaker. And whereas United States, 15.4%, 31% for India, 51% for Japan, and 68% for the European Union felt that these powers or countries are more respectful for international law and more responsible. Now, this is not, this is a survey. You may not believe in everything about it, but this is, this really reflects the views of China's, a significant chunk of China's neighbors, in my view, since I have spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia and actually can relate to this emphasis. I started my career at this Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, which did this survey. So here you have a trust deficit. China, on the other hand, is seen as the most important economic and strategic player, but the least trusted security actor. And this is Asia's big problem. So moving on to the third one, and I'll be very brief here, regional institutions. Can we use regional institutions? Can we count on regional institutions to reduce the trust imbalance between China and its neighbors and build confidence, also, revive the economies after COVID-19? Now, Asia has, it's actually quite useful to think about, to compare Asia in 2003, when the last major pandemic hit the region, the SARS crisis in 2003, and the 2019 COVID-19 crisis. Now, 16 years have passed, but there's a dramatic development when it comes to Asian institutions and also Chinese diplomacy. Now, in 2003, China was at the height of what is called the charm offensive, Chinese charm offensive. I used to live in Singapore, and I could see that Chinese diplomats were, very open-minded, and they're coming out, cultivating the region. So it was called a charm offensive. If you look at today, that perception, at least, that the charm offensive has given way to what we call wolf warrior diplomacy. So just think of the terminology, charm offensive versus wolf warrior diplomacy, which is a term for very aggressive, rather blunt and coercive, oppressive diplomacy that Chinese diplomats are pursuing, at least they're perceived to be pursuing. I think that both are exaggerated. I don't think charm offensive was really that charming. I don't think all Chinese diplomats are pursuing wolf warrior diplomacy. I think Western media is kind of exaggerating quite a bit here. But there is no question that China's soft power has declined in the region since 2003. And this has come in tandem with regional institutions. In 2003, China was a big supporter of Asian regional institutions, big supporter of Association of Southeast Asian Nations, big supporter of the ASEAN Regional Forum created in '94, and was leading towards the East Asia Summit in 2005, 2 years after SARS. East Asia Summit, or EAS, was created. China was seen as a very involved, responsible, engaged builder of regional cooperation. Not so much anymore. In the last 10 years at least, China has come to distrust ASEAN. China has taken a more hardline policy towards ASEAN because China felt that ASEAN countries are ganging up against China when it comes to South China Sea. Under Obama, when Obama was president, he was so close to ASEAN that China felt ASEAN moved too close to US and neglect China. China sees ASEAN as a competitor to a much greater extent than it did in 2003. And in the meantime, China has built up its own multilateral or bilateral institutions. So China has done the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, And of course, bilaterally, the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is mainly bilateral, but neither of these two, actually, ASEAN is driving it. ASEAN drives ASEAN Regional Forum, East Asia Summit, the multilateral bodies. But ASEAN is not a real actor when it comes to AIIB or the BRI, although ASEAN participates in BRI, some countries at least. But it is basically it's a bilateral initiative run basically by China. As these Chinese initiatives, there are other Chinese initiatives I can talk about, but as these China's parallel institutions have come up, ASEAN's importance has declined, and the importance of ASEAN-led institutions, ASEAN centrality has declined. This is one reason why these institutions are not as credible and don't inspire as much confidence as they did in 2003, early 2000s. But in the meantime, these institutions have not done very well when it comes to COVID-19. Now, in SARS crisis, when I was living in Singapore, I could see that the ASEAN, there was another group called ASEAN Plus 3. The 10 countries of ASEAN plus South Korea, Japan, and China did a fantastic job in quickly responding to SARS. Borders were not closed. There was no blame game going on, no conspiracy theories going around. And actually, it was a pretty effective form of regional cooperation. But there's a big difference, of course. SARS in 2003 was deadly, much more deadly than COVID-19, but much less contagious. This COVID-19 has basically, caught everybody by surprise and shock. It is so contagious. It's less deadly, but it's so contagious that borders came down, walls came down very quickly, which never happened in 2003. And also everybody is panicking to build their national health capacity and national response capacity. So regional cooperation, regional surveillance, regional mutual help did not really go to that extent, despite some activity. So Asian regional institutions, I'm afraid, have not done a very good job. And also ASEAN and Asia doesn't have that kind of European Union style facility to provide stimulus. The European Union is going to spend $1 trillion in reviving the economies of its members. ASEAN doesn't have that kind of money. ASEAN does have one facility, or Asia has one facility, which is called Chiang Mai Initiative, and that's basically to provide currency support. If your currency is under attack, being devalued, you can borrow money from each other on a bilateral basis or for a multi. It's like a mini regional IMF. But that's only for currency attacks. It's not a stimulus that will revive your economy. So Asia has no regional mechanism, regional funding to give aid and rebuild economies, which also makes it very difficult to build confidence through regional institutions. Last but not the least is ideology. Ideology is important because it reflects domestic politics, but also soft power of countries like China. Asia has been pretty lucky. After the end of the Cold War, Asia had no ideological rivalry. I mean, we had a conflict, a competition between the China model of a strong state-managed economic growth, and authoritarianism, the so-called China model, versus the liberal model of the United States. But most of Asia is not liberal. It doesn't get the US model. So most of Asia was happy to live with China model. And even the United States, under Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and others, George W. Bush, did not really press ideology. Ideology was not an issue. But that's changing under Trump. Trump, under especially Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, is very ideological, determined to call China as a human rights abuser, as an undemocratic authoritarian state. And after COVID-19, he has gone even further. And there is a really ideological campaign against China. I don't think China is retaliating ideologically, although it's not very happy about it. But the United States certainly is moving much more aggressively against China ideologically. But that ideological equilibrium we had before is changing. But China's situation doesn't look good here, because China was trying to build a new image, new ideology, not just the China model. The China model did not really go very far. I mean, even Singaporeans who are closer to China when it comes to strong states and state-led economic growth, did not think they can match China, they can emulate China in mobilizing country and shutting down a country in the way China did after the Wuhan outbreak. Actually, Singaporean former diplomat, the former foreign secretary of Singapore, Bilahari Kaushik, said, only a Leninist state can do this. We cannot do this. And that's a pretty big admission because Singapore is a very strong state, strong government. So China model is not really all that attractive before, but now people are going to associate China model with a failure to deal with the virus when it started. To be very sure, China has done a very good job of containing the virus after the breakout, but the fact that the virus came from China is not going to be erased from the minds of Southeast Asians or Asians. In fact, people blamed President Trump for calling China virus, but Singaporean papers were calling it Wuhan virus for the first 2-3 months. I forget, I was reading the Straits Times on a daily basis, and they called it Wuhan virus, until COVID-19, the term was coined and then moved away. So this is something not going to go away from the minds of the Southeast Asians, but also other Asians, maybe even for the world. And I think this is partly unfortunate. I don't believe one should name a virus after a country. I don't believe one should call it Wuhan virus or China virus, but this is a fact. China will be associated with this virus, and but maybe it would be good if the Chinese, did not have these conspiracy theories, and they actually, did a better job of admitting their failures. Some of that has happened, but I don't think this has convinced a lot of Asians, and this has led to a decline of Chinese soft power. And to make matters worse, the Chinese sort of diplomacy, mask diplomacy, providing medical help and all that, has had a mixed effect. Some people like it, some people think it is not really, the quality is not very good. So to conclude this discussion, where is Asia heading? We look at economic interdependence and growth, which bad for Asia. The military balance may not be so bad for the US, but certainly in the China-ASEAN context, really bad for ASEAN. In the case of institutions, not a very good rosy outlook. Institutions haven't done very well. And if you look at ideology, it's heating up in a way. And it's really maybe bad for China's soft power. But the whole, it is going to create also nationalism in China. So if you look at this, where is Asia going to go? I mean, there are different scenarios, but I've always believed in 3 main scenarios for Asia, which is true before the COVID crisis, but we can also update them in the light of the COVID crisis. One is, modeling through. Asia will be still hedging and not taking sides in the US-China rivalry, and that's something to be said about it. Many Asians do not want to be caught up in the US-China rivalry, although if the rivalry escalates, it will be very difficult for many countries in Asia to sit on the fence and not take sides. So I think that scenario is getting weaker. The second scenario is the Sinocentric regional order. The Sinocentric regional order would be like a Chinese Monroe Doctrine. Nothing new, it has been talked about, but I think COVID-19 makes it impossible for China to have that soft power to actually make it work. And you cannot build a Monroe Doctrine purely by coercion in the 21st century. You could do that in the 19th century, or the United States did, or early 20th century. But that United States was in Latin America, Caribbean, no great power was there. China is surrounded by big powers like Japan, India, and even the Koreans and Indonesians are not small fries either. So a Monroe Doctrine, that would be Chinese coercive sort of a sphere of influence, I don't think is likely, and China's soft power has declined. Third scenario, which may surprise some of us, is that the region will become more pro-Western. I mean, South Asia was always a bit more pro-Western, despite all the rise of China. Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea, there is an element of neutralism. We don't want to take sides, but at the same time, when the chips are down, which side you want to take? Well, it may not be, they won't say it's China's side or US side, but I think in general, if you look at the overall economic strategic picture, Asians have kind of psychological reliance in the US is quite strong. But the big problem here is American diplomacy. So right now, American soft power in the region is also very low. American credibility is also very low. But that's easily fixed, more easily fixed than you think. A lot of this has to do with the way Trump has dealt with the region, bullying its allies, demanding money from, like an extortion money from Korea for defending Korea, not showing up in ASEAN summit like last year in Thailand. But these things can be fixed. I mean, it's a new administration in November. If that happens, can easily fix it. One of the advantages that democracies have over autocracies, the democracies can make 180-degree turns if the regimes change. It's pretty difficult for a one-party state to change direction so dramatically, especially knowing that the current Chinese leader is not supposed to leave anytime soon. So the United States does have an advantage, but it does need to play its cards. It needs to have and also my sense from looking at the region is a lot of the disappointment with the US is due to disengagement and kind of disrespect, not because of any long-term factor associated with the United States. I mean, the United States has a trust deficit a little bit, but nothing comparable to China. So that can be fixed. What about China? Well, here is my final point. I don't think one should think that China is going to behave the way it has behaved in the last 5 years. China has a capacity for changing course, just like even if it's authoritarian, but China can also learn and China can also modify its behavior. So to me, the future of Asian security after COVID-19 depends not so much on the military balance, not so much on the economic balance or ideology, but on Chinese behavior. How China behaves towards its neighbors, especially towards the neighbors, not towards the United States so much as towards its neighbors. To me, a global power with global ambition, cannot make it work without regional legitimacy and support. And China used to have that in the 1990s, 2000s, but has lost it in the last 10 years. But if China changes course, and it has to really get rid of the old warrior diplomacy and go back a little bit to the 2000s, but also have to make some significant territorial concessions, which I don't know if the Chinese are prepared to do. That could make a big difference. The moral of the story here is that I will not give up that China can make some adjustments and then think that, okay, it is a victory for the West. I think the situation is still fluid, but the bottom line is this ball is in China's court. China has a good reason, maybe a legitimate reason, to take umbrage with what Americans are doing, the American ideological campaign, the trade war, the tariffs. I think any country would be offended by this and take actions. So United States might be a legitimate target for China in retaliation or countering. But China's neighbors have done nothing to provoke the wolf warriors. China's neighbors have done nothing, I repeat, to provoke that kind of reaction that they feel, rightly or wrongly, that China is becoming, that kind of trust deficit that has come out in the opinion polls. So in that sense, the ball is in China's court. And as a friend of mine, very prominent Australian Chinese scholar, Kai He, wrote recently in an editorial, in an op-ed in South China Morning Post, and he asked, China, if you think everybody is against you, it is time to reflect. I repeat, China, if you think everyone is against you, it's time to reflect. And that's what I leave my presentation.
Thank you for listening to Ideas Matter, a podcast by the Berggruen Institute that explores some of the biggest challenges facing our societies and shaping who we are as humans. During this time of great transformations, we need new ideas and deep, long-term thinking more than ever. We invite you to join us in discovery. You can find us on social media at Berggruen Institute, and please subscribe to Noema, our new digital and print magazine at noemamag.com.